meeting is now called to order. This is a meeting of the Berkeley Police Review Commission. Today's date is November 14th, 2018, and the time is 7:07 p.m. Ms. Lee, would you please call roll?
Allenby says she cannot make it tonight. She has respiratory problems. Calavita? Here. Matthews?
Here.
Commissioner Perez-Velez will be here after the meeting he's in right now. Pritchett?
Present.
Ramsey?
Here.
Roberts?
Here.
Sherman?
Present.
Commissioner Yampolsky said he's on his way.
Thank you. Also present is Catherine Lee, the PRC officer. The next order of business is approval of the agenda. I would like to request that we postpone Commissioner Allenby's item, 9A, as she won't be here today. Are there any objections to that?
9A?
9A, yeah.
Yes, Chair.
Yes.
I was going over this thing. I noticed there's a number of items that pages 12 and 13, I believe, that listed in the minutes that we had to postpone from last meeting. And I'm concerned that we need to take care, not get too far behind at least, take care of some items that are directly relevant to the work we do. With that in mind, and I just talked with Commissioner Pritchett over here regarding our items 9D, 1 and 2, the issue of the sound truck and more of a generalized discussion. My thoughts would be to put this at the end of the agenda if there's time, but even with that, maybe holding it over to December. I just came across a resolution tonight that I thought I might work on and bring to this. We'll see how this goes. But this is not time. I don't think the Nazis are going to be coming back to Berkeley till at least January. We do have some other items that are of importance that I think we should clean up. And I would definitely, I think we should dispose of it in December. So I would recommend either save it at the end if we have a lot of time and do it, not bring a resolution in the following meeting, or just wait till December and get it done with that.
Okay.
That's okay.
Are there any objections?
But excuse me, one thing. By asking to postpone it and keep putting it off like this, I don't mean anybody in this room to minimize, to any way think that I'm minimizing the importance of 9D2. It's a discussion that we should have had a while ago, and I will have some things have gotten changed a lot since you first put it on the agenda, but it is of importance, but it's not timely at this time. So the importance can wait till next December, till December. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any objections to moving 9D to after 9J? Or did you want it all the way?
You can put it all the way at the end if you like.
Okay, moving 9D to the end of the agenda.
Or carrying it over until December, we don't get to it.
Okay. No? All right. Just the agenda? Yeah, thank you. Okay, if not, we can approve the agenda by general consent. So moved. We will now move on to public comment. Just as a reminder, you have 3 minutes. Yes.
Looks like the police are boycotting tonight. It's interesting. I wasn't going to speak. I was going to listen tonight until I saw on called thehill.com an article that says Trump warns Antifa opposition view could be tougher and much more violent. In the middle of it, he says, Trump during an interview Wednesday said the groups that oppose Antifa include the military, the police, and a lot of tough people. In other words, fascists supporting fascists, in my mind. And at the end of it, the end of our article, it says, the Anti-Defamation League describes Antifa ideology as rooted in the assumption that the Nazi Party would never have been able to come to power in Germany if people had more aggressively fought them in the streets in the 20s and 30s. So, is the president calling for civil war in this country right now? Mm-hmm. Is he calling out these people to come and attack us at demonstrations? Mm-hmm. Yes, he is. Yes, he is. I supported the Guilt Track Farm. I support Antifa, Black Lives Matter, Palestine, the National Lawyers Guild, and the people mentioned that this fascist president of ours, this dictator-like fossil, is trying to impose upon the people of Berkeley, as well as around the country, I would remind you to please remind the Berkeley police that the ones responsible for any problems with the people of Berkeley will be answerable to the people of Berkeley. Much like when we break laws, we're answerable to the police. When they break laws, they're going to be answerable to the people of Berkeley. So I would request that you go on record as opposing the president's attack on Antifa. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there any more public comment at this time? No? All right, seeing as there's no public comment, we will move on to approval of the minutes from last meeting.
Chair, there's actually 2 minutes to approve. One are the special meeting minutes.
I'm sorry, what?
There are 2 sets of minutes to approve. One is from the special meeting of October 17th on page 7. And then the last meeting, October 24th. So probably appropriate to take separate votes.
Separate votes, all right. So starting with the special meeting minutes on page 7. Are there any changes to those minutes in the agenda? If not, can we approve the special meeting minutes by general consent?
Yes.
All right, so moved. Moving on to the regular meeting minutes on page 9.
Oh,
Are there any changes to these minutes?
No change, there's no changes, but it would be appropriate here regarding the minutes to ask a question of the PRC officer, wait for her report. I'm looking at item 8A, 8A on page 11. I just had a question to ask her, should I ask her now or wait till the report time?
I think you can ask them for now.
Sure.
Okay, 8A, homeless,
Yes.
Encampment Subcommittee, PRC officer, follow-up inquiry to city manager's office about enforcement of homeless encampments. Could you give us, do you want to wait to give your full report or to answer that, or you want to deal with it now?
Well, the answer is, I may as well give you the quick answer, which is I have not had a response.
You've not had one?
I did follow up, I have not gotten a response.
Oh.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chair.
Are there any other questions? All right, if not, can we approve these minutes by general consent?
I want to abstain.
Okay. Everyone else? So moved. Moving on to my chair's report. As you can see, we have had a packed agenda for a while, so I just want to encourage commissioners to keep time in mind as always, and hopefully we can get through a lot today. And also recognize that Lieutenant Angela Hawk is now here, so thank you for coming.
Sorry for the delay. Where the
No
gold bars?
worries.
What's that? Where the gold bars? Delayed. Running behind today. Apologies.
We'll still see you.
Yeah, I demoted myself.
With that, also, after the chief's report, I do want to remind commissioners to please keep your questions to a limit of 2 minutes per commissioner. And also, we will be ending at 9:30 today, 9:35, shooting for it to go into closed session. So that is my report. We can move on to the PRC officer's report.
Thank you, Chair. I was in Acapulco for vacation last week.
Nice.
And,
It's gonna be a long night, isn't it?
Oh, boy.
Yes, it is.
I would pull
It's a long story, but before my husband and I left, we were not quite aware of the terrible situation with crime there. And it's so, actually so bad specifically in Acapulco that the local police department apparently was so corrupt that they released them all and brought in the federales to serve as the local police, who walk around with rifles. So, anyway, I had a nice time, but it's good to be home. We have one new possible complaint being filed. A person came in yesterday, started to fill out the form, and she said, oh, she wanted to take it home and finish it, so I expect that to come in soon. I passed out, one of the things I passed out was an email from Sergeant Ross, who attached some information about a training opportunity which he suggested would be useful for a commissioner to attend. And while I would agree. It is 3 full days, and it costs $350, but if there is anybody who thinks they
Money to
can
spare.
or will make the commit, no, this is what I wanna say, if anybody thinks that they can make that commitment, so let me know and I will see.
Ooh.
Squeeze the-
Is that Dublin, Ireland?
No.
Okay, well, I guess I won't go then.
You pay for your own transportation.
I'll pay for the flight.
Oh,
I'll pay the
and,
part fare.
and then, the chief gave his mid-year crime report a couple weeks ago to the council, and the question is whether you are interested in agendizing that. If you wanted that, you should do it at your next meeting, because after that, it's gonna get a little stale. I put the information is in your packet.
Which act, what are you saying?
Chief crime
A
report?
crime report, mid-year
Oh,
crime report from the
Oh,
chief.
okay, yeah.
I mean, the other thing you could do is watch the
Which council
council
meeting?
meeting.
Yeah, I was gonna say, which council meeting is it?
It was the meeting of, not last night, 2 weeks before last night. October 30th. Yeah,
Could you send us the timestamp for the video?
sure,
Send us a what?
okay, the timestamp for the video.
Oh. That'd be good. You're not gonna watch the whole meeting?
It's in the video.
The reason I'm throwing it out to you, rather than just automatically agendizing it, is because you have so much on your agenda, so.
What is it you're not agendizing?
The mid-year crime report from the chief.
She's asking us if we want to again.
If you want him to present it
So
to
he
you.
already presented it to the.
He presented it to the council.
There's a video recording of it, and you can tell us what kind of questions, whether we want him to come give it to us separately. And there's notes of it in the packet.
There's, right, the report that he sent to the council starts on page 19 of your packet.
Right.
It has the charts and graphs that he,
Can I ask a question of this?
sure.
I, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that the crime report was gonna be accompanied by some kind of report as to how they're going to respond to the, CPE.
Yes, the
and-
chief
and so
orally
forth.
made a commitment at that meeting to have something by the spring.
By
Right,
spring?
Spring.
Harrison.
Harrison,
She put a motion through,
yes, page 20.
Page 27.
27, 28, 29. So, I mean, with all respect to this, city council is trying to get the same thing and they can't get it. She's very politely acknowledging that there was a commitment that was made. The first installment of the annual city manager report was to coincide with the release of the mid-year crime report.
Right.
Yeah.
So-
So the city manager-
CPE report, I think hit sometime last summer or something, if I'm remembering that right.
It was last
May.
January.
May.
The CPE report came through and finalized finally last summer, and then the commitment was September to get a report
Do
from.
we need
That's
to
right.
agendize this for a future meeting, or is it something?
If you
Not,
wanted,
yeah, not
think
this
we
last
should
summer,
keep-
this summer before that.
I would just like to have a statement
Yeah,
coming from
yeah.
us.
Yeah.
then I'll agendize it.
Captain statement,
Yeah.
we'll just say that it's
Where is it?
freaking ridiculous.
Yeah. Where's the report and where's the let's get going on the task force.
Actually, I don't think it was last year, I think it was earlier this year, but anyway, I'm sorry.
No, I'm saying a statement asking the city manager to move on getting a task force going.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll agendize that.
Yes, thank you.
Is there anything else for your reports?
No, that's it for me, thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to the chief's report.
Oh, I'm sorry, I do have one more thing. So, on page 15 and 17 of your packet,
15 and 17?
pages 15 and 17 are tasks you've taken on or wanna take on. There's a list of things that you're working on, some things that have been agendized and not yet gotten to. There's, on page 17 is a list of things that are sort of on hold or pending. And then at the end, at the bottom of 17, that section is called recurring. And those are things that are ongoing, things that happen regularly. Some on a regular schedule and some irregularly. So the point in doing all this is you need to take a look at all the things that you are interested in taking on, and then to help me by prioritizing. So a suggestion I have, and I'm open to discussion, if people have other ideas, is to do the SurveyMonkey poll again. And some of you weren't here when I did it earlier this year, but basically I used SurveyMonkey. I put all the topics on a list and asked each one of you to rank each item. And then I come up with some sort of average, and I get from there I derived an overall ranking sense of the body as a whole. Yes.
So I think this is very helpful. I wonder if, in addition to the rankings, like what we consider most important, we could also somehow incorporate an efficiency thing. Like, for example, fair and impartial policing, follow up on recommendations, awaiting the task force. It seems to me that all we need to do is draft a statement to the city manager. Mm-hmm. And that can be done relatively quickly. I hate to bump things that could be done like this in favor of something that might have higher priority, but will take us 3 meetings. So
Okay.
I'd really like to be able to get things off the list that can be gotten on quickly. And to me, that's a top priority, that one anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I don't know how to achieve that, but that can be done quickly.
Right.
And there may be some other things like that we could do. Because some of these things get bumped because we spend
Right.
3 meetings talking about X.
Right.
Would that be, so I agree with that. Could that be something in the form of an additional column for, that would be something like, anticipated course of action or suggested, from Ms. Lee, that we, could feel free to accept or reject, but it could be a kind of
Like support that.
steps that we might, based on our discussion,
Yeah.
based on, your intuition.
Mhm. What has to be done to accomplish it?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Would that be
Or-
productive, or is that not?
I could figure out, yes, I get what Commissioner Calavita wants to achieve, and I think it's a really good point. I'm just trying to figure out how to do that in the context of ranking. So,
Oh, yes.
Usually, it seems like a lot of the issues on this list are sort of, they're held there sort of in some weird purgatory
Mhm.
because they're awaiting a response,
Mhm.
either from the chief or the city manager or something. And I think the question at this point becomes responsiveness to PRC requests.
Mhm.
And so it might be useful to review this list and consolidate those issues which are awaiting a response. And maybe we could draft something that centers that as the issue rather than even individual topics.
I think that's a good idea. Like, for example, the use of force report that the chief had promised for some time,
Yeah,
and that's still hanging.
right.
There's a
Right.
bunch of these,
So I don't think that's an either or though, because we can
yeah.
write a statement for the city manager, another one for the chief about, yeah, so I don't think we should make the general thing and then ignore the, I really wanna send statements out saying, we're waiting for this, where is it?
No, I'm with it, but
I think
I
that's
perceive a
more
more,
general,
kind of
yeah.
a more fundamental
So we
kind
can,
of disconnect that we're having here with the rest of the city government.
So we have, 2 suggestions. Is there any way, Ms. Lee, I can help you figure out how we can best put that into some type of survey for everyone?
As far as the pending items, I wasn't planning to include them necessarily as priorities. But the way I thought of them was priorities for you to take on in a meeting, which doesn't include these other things.
But
maybe
that
the
is-
two of you can get together and brainstorm about,
Yeah.
so after we rank,
Sure.
okay, these can be done quickly, and then move on.
I would be happy to do that
Okay.
with you,
Okay,
if that's an
we'll
easy
work on
solution.
that then.
Okay.
Well, on that point though, Les, just looking at the use of force revision, I mean, it's on there as a high priority, right? But we can't do anything, until we get something from the chief.
Right.
So we're just,
Well, we do have
Well,
on our
yes, we can.
agenda,
and so I think it should, you know, I think all the things that are hanging should go on one list to show that there's a critical mass of things that are just languishing.
But in addition, we can send a statement to the chief, please give us this use of force policy.
and that is agendized in 9I, responsiveness of BPD management to TRC requests, so maybe that's something that we could incorporate when we take that up
Right.
in the
Maybe we
discussion,
should
if that's
prioritize
appropriate.
that at the next meeting, and maybe we can
Yeah.
prepare some language and
So
some
I'd just like to do a series of
Okay.
specific pokes.
No, I'm with you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful. I will prepare a poll on SurveyMonkey, and I will, get together with the chair to talk about the, approaching the outstanding items.
Is that it for your?
Now, I am done.
Okay. Moving on to the chief's report.
Okay. Chief couldn't be here, so, he did send me notes to share. So, staffing report, we're at 163, so, we're trending up, which is good news. Dispatchers, we've got 24 out of 28, so, they're doing some hires too, I understand. They've got 3 laterals, in the background process, and they're working their way through a list of, several entry-level applicants, so, our personnel and training unit is cranking. They are also getting ready to do, for the new officer process, a physical agility test, that we do that is one of the battery of tests that officers have to pass. They're gonna start that in early December. They've got, it looks like about 100 folks, who are qualified to take the test, and, but typically that's not how many we have show up. I think the expectation is they think they'll have about 60 show up to take the physical agility test. They're gonna have an information day on December 1st. This is all through P&T, and it's also gonna be open to the public. It's typically used for applicants, but now they're doing, anybody who's interested, members of the public can come out, ask questions, talk about each phase of the test, and even try the test if they want to. So to kind of get an experience for what cops have to go through to get hired. They're in the process of hiring CSOs, dispatchers, who they just had the written test for that. Still trying to get some more dispatchers. Our recruitment team is on social media now, so I don't know if he brought that up the last time. They're on Instagram as well as Twitter, so if you want to, you can check it out. and follow along with what the recruiting team is up to. They are working on contracts with outside background investigators so that we can reduce our turnaround time on backgrounds to get faster and more agile, because we're competing with other agencies. So we want to try to snap up qualified applicants as quickly as possible so they don't get hired away by somebody else. And they're going through several presentations from marketers. They're going to try to hire a marketing firm to expand the efforts and do online advertising as well for our hiring process. There's still, I mean, it takes a bit of time to kind of get through these, the contracts and all the presentations. But once they have a vendor, he says that they're gonna give you guys more information about the marketing firm and what they're presenting. We're looking to do recruitment retention incentives. This is kind of being done by several agencies in the Bay Area, and they're gonna go to council with that. Body-worn cameras are up and going. They've captured over 16,000 files.
16,000 what?
Files?
Files?
What does that mean?
What is a file? Is that like one incident or something?
That's a really good question. And I'm very new at it that I don't know. I don't know if it's, so, you know, every night I have to put this thing in, it has to go the right colors before I can leave, right? So that I know that it's uploading. So I don't know if it's per incident. That's a good question. I don't know.
Are you tagging each incident?
Yeah, I have to tag each, yeah. So it has to be associated with a call. So at the end of the night, yeah, I mean, basically if it's some kind of police enforcement action, that's, like right now you guys aren't on camera because I'm not really planning on arresting anyone. But yeah, so at the end of the night, but if I'm on scene and, you know, I talk to somebody or something, not that I'm doing the full investigation, but it would be associated with that stop. So I have to make sure that it matches up with our CAD report.
So all the officers have the cameras and they're using them all the time at this point? They're in the field and they're using them?
Yep. Yep. So,
Did
I
they
mean,
get
we're
their-
still, you know, there's been people out on vacation or whatever. We're picking up the stragglers who've been out, but yeah. So,
Well, on that point, do you have a city-issued iPhone? And can you tell us how it works?
can I tell you how it works?
Yeah, in other words, what you can do with it and what you can't? Well, how you use it?
It's like a normal iPhone? What do you mean?
I mean, well, it works with the system, right?
Yeah, it has an app
So you
on
can do
here
your
that,
tape, you can do your tape
right,
from your camera, right?
correct, yes.
And what else can you do with it? Can you actually record
With my phone?
with the phone?
I haven't tried to do that because I have this, so
Can you do it now?
I don't know, let's see.
I just thought we could get a quick tutorial.
I like
about
that,
what the-
yeah, let's do
the
it.
hell's
We're gonna
going
have a
on.
demonstration, remember?
Right,
You
we're
were
gonna get
supposed
specs, we're gonna have
You were
demos
supposed to
and
do
all that.
demo.
Yeah, the camera feature is still on here, so I guess say hello, everybody. This is the Police Review Commission.
So that's, you're doing that, you can.
That
you
is
can
with the.
Make a tape from the iPhone.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Gosh, I wonder what'll happen.
And can you, did you take any tapes off your camera today that you can pull up and review?
I haven't
Or you haven't actually used
recorded
it?
anything today, yeah. So there's nothing on my camera to show you.
Oh, I see.
So you have the body camera on now?
Mm-hmm.
Is that it on the front here? Where is it? Oh, there it is.
So,
Uh-huh.
Record us for 30 seconds.
For training, sure. Get it snapped back in.
And so do the people, you've used it though, not today, but you've used it already?
Yeah, not as frequently as, because most of my time is spent
Right, but you.
honestly working on staffing, but,
So,
yeah.
so do people recognize that they're being, videoed?
That's probably a better question for people who are in the field. So,
That's a pretty strong indicator.
Yeah.
You know, there's so much
What-
paraphernalia, I'm not sure I would know that was a camera.
yeah.
Anyway, you
Is
don't.
that a red light, meaning that it's off?
Yeah, I haven't recorded.
So if you were recording right now, it would go to green?
Well,
Is that how
so
somebody would know?
it would go, well, my indicator, it goes red on top here, so can you see the top?
I see.
So this
So that tells
to
you
me,
that it's going.
it's staged. Well, it's actually taking, it goes 30 seconds back.
Right.
But it doesn't have audio. So our conversation,
For
other
those
than
30
you
for those
nodding
30
your head.
seconds, it doesn't
Right.
have audio.
and so then but once I tap this, it goes red. So visually I can look down and say, okay, yeah, because I have hit it, and I didn't hit it hard enough.
How hard do you have to hit it?
It's not hard, so it's just,
Oh, I see. Oh, you
so
just
it's
have it right
recording. And I'll say hello, everybody.
And you're required to record every stop that you make, or every call that you're on?
There we go. There it goes. See, I have to sit here and look at it. Yeah, not like, so if I'm having coffee and somebody comes up and asks me directions, I'm not gonna record
No,
that
but-
interaction. But if they ask me directions to Mars, and I go, this could be something, it's a little, so then I would turn it on, like, uh-oh, something's not quite right.
But every time you're doing an auto stop or a pedestrian stop or
Right.
responding to a call, it must be on.
Yes.
It must go on.
Yeah.
And you don't inform people that it's going, is that right?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
So, before you submit that footage to the algorithm, to the main archiving, to evidence.com, can you access that now on your phone?
The video?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What you just showed us?
Yeah. Let's see if I can make
Or what
this
you just,
happen. Yeah, it's taking its time.
And our understanding, or my understanding, is that that is available on the app up until the time when you submit the camera at the end of your workday, and all the footage is uploaded. Once it's uploaded off of the body camera, is it true that it's no longer accessible by the iPhone?
Correct.
Say that again, please? Once it's what?
So the idea is that here's the body camera. At the end of her shift, she puts it in some kind of dock that
Right.
allows it to be uploaded.
To the rifle.
After that time,
Uploaded to the
No,
cloud.
into the archive.
Evidence.
into
Okay.
evidence
Into the
to let-
cloud.
and after that, the footage would no longer be viewable on the iPhone.
On the iPhone,
Oh,
But up until that time.
because it feeds off the camera, off the body camera,
Right.
right? So if you
Yeah.
can't, if there's nothing
Although
on the body,
mine's right
there's
now
nothing on the
not
body camera,
linking
you're not
for
gonna
some-
get anything on the iPhone.
I'm just getting one of those loading things, so I can't
There's no
show you what the
internet.
video is, so.
So-
Wait, Christine, get it in there. No.
But yes, all those things you said were accurate.
Well, anyway, in my question, I was just trying to get a quick idea of what was going on there, and, I'm not sure that really takes care of all the questions we have, but we follow up with that later, otherwise
And
we'll
where do
use the
you-
whole meeting for that.
And if by some miracle of miracles, your body camera's not working, and your department issued iPhone isn't there, if you were taking video on your own phone, what is the protocol?
You would treat it like you would any other evidence. So, but I personally would not use my personal cell phone.
So would you email the footage somewhere, or would you? If it was on your private, if it was on your own iPhone, would you text it or email it to a particular address, or?
No, I wouldn't. I don't use my personal cell phone to take photos or video.
Sorry.
Yeah, but like if you were saying like a video recorder, right? Yeah, I would download it, just like you would any other normal digital recording.
Commissioner Bridger, are you asking if there's an alternative means to get it to evidence.com?
Yeah.
If it's another source? Is that the-
We were supposed to.
Yeah. So it's the same thing as what our crime scene techs who take photos, they use, a higher end camera, then they would dump it into evidence.com. Yes.
Before the body worn cameras, what would officers do with recordings that they made on their personal iPhone? Not to hide the ball, the car went on a ride along and
Right.
one of the officers used a smartphone, I don't know if it was his personal one or.
Yeah, it could have been. I mean, we had
But he
they would have
recorded
downloaded
some
it, to our, I can't remember what the other platform was called, our digital platform was called prior to this, but anyway, yeah. There was a digital evidence, where they put digital photos in, so that's controlled and tracked and it's treated as evidence.
Deb, do you have any other questions?
Well, I guess my question is there anything written about how the evidence used to be treated? Was there a training bulletin or anything that you know of?
I'm sure there's a general order that covers evidence and what we have to do with it. I don't know it off the top of my head, but yeah.
I imagine they'll be one of these Lexipol policies that we're gonna come across.
Yeah, I'll find out what it is.
We did get a little sidetracked. Did you have more to your report?
Sure. Let's see here. Sounds like Captain Roleri and Sergeant Spillman have been working with the subcommittee, Lexipol subcommittee, so hopefully that's working out. And sounds like Lieutenant Montgomery's gonna be working with Commissioner Ramsey, right? Okay, so that got squared away.
Yeah, we're gonna.
Okay.
He's gonna give me the name of a person to,
Okay.
deal with the prioritize and safety side.
Chief Greenwood said they're gonna be putting together a presentation on use of spit hoods by emergency responders. So you guys will get a presentation on that. I know there were questions.
Do you have a date on that?
No, no date. They're still working on the policy review of how photos are booked and then subsequently removed from the camera. So, I guess they're looking at the language in the current policy for that.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that last one?
Sure. Working on policy review for how photos, which you were just asking about, are booked and then subsequently removed from the camera.
So they're working on that policy?
Well, I think it's just policy review to make sure that it's incorporated.
Okay.
Honestly, these are his notes, so exactly the intent of that, I don't know. And then lastly, this may give some clarification to the conversation you guys were having earlier. He's gonna be preparing a report on the various recommendations from CPE report to, Councilmember Harrison's, item and to you guys. To be completed by March 31st. This will address each recommendation and discuss path forward.
Which one was that on, before March 31st?
March 31st.
That's the
The
disparities.
CPE response to
Oh,
CPE.
CBE,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right, that's it. That's all I got for you guys.
I have one question on the staffing. You had gone through the staffing there, I think you said there were 163
63.
filled.
Yeah, so
Out
that
of
would be.
what's authorized? How many?
That's
au-
not what is, I think we're authorized to we're authorized to hire to 181. But
181.
but that's
and you
to
got
over
163
hire.
filled,
Yeah.
right?
I'm sorry, what?
You authorized 181 and you got 163 filled, is that what you said?
Yeah, I think our actual authorization is 176. Don't quote me on that one. It's in the 170s, but we're authorized to overhire to try to account for people who are gonna retire the normal attrition rate and to try to catch up. We haven't even.
Okay, and on
Close
the
to
163, has that moved up any notches in the last few months? I don't recall.
That moved up from the notes that I even had. I had 161, so I'm not sure about 163. Breaking 160 was monumental. We've been below 160 for, I would say close to a year.
Right, yeah. And so, or what's happening to fill the gap? Is all overtime? Everybody's working
overtime.
overtime? Basically to fill the gap?
And, you know, we don't have, positions filled, like we're still,
Mhm.
we haven't beefed up. We
And
don't
are
have
you
the.
noticing in all your recruitment activities that there's more interest or there's less interest, or what's going on? I mean, what's your sense of what's going on out there in terms of people coming to Berkeley to be police officers?
Well, I mean, we're tracking up, which is good. I don't know that I suspect part of that is because our attrition rate has also slowed. So, but we will be, you know, there's several people planning to retire next year. It's normal. I mean, that's like a normal thing that happens. So, you know, we're starting to make gains and not losses. So, you know, we kept going down and down and down, and this past 2 months, we've started to make gains. So my answer is anecdotally, I would say that we're having better success because we are actually making some gains. However, I will tell you, I've been gone for the last couple of weeks, which is why I'm still trying to catch up and seem a little bit hurried. But I was at management school, and I'm in there with 17 different agencies, from Bay Area even to some agencies that are in Southern California. Everybody is having the same problem.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So,
And, you know, if you're 10 people down or so, you know, and you're working overtime, that's been going on for a long time,
It
maybe a
has.
year. So how's the morale and what's going on with all that?
that's tough. We still can't sell all the overtime spots that we have.
And are
So-
people burning out, or,
Yeah.
and what about the, after the MOU was approved, are people looking more, positively towards?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, you know, there is a little bit better enthusiasm, but again, this is, you know, just my perspective.
Okay.
Commissioner.
Thank you.
Yeah, just a quick question. The number of almost all the news agencies reported that the FBI's report on hate crimes for the first 6 months of 2017,
Mhm.
and had a report that, you know, had some numbers. My question to you is, if you don't know if that's fine, would these reports like that, or from the Department of Homeland Security, or from whoever else is out there, do do those reports normally come to Chief Greenwood's desk or police chiefs all across the country? Or do you, if you see, read it, if he was to read in the paper, would he request it? Does the FBI normally send out reports of this particular nature that I'm referring to?
Honestly, I don't know what the FBI's protocol is. I mean, if we have a hate crime in our city, we report it up
Right, and then it
to
goes
the
into
chief.
the FBI report. Yeah.
So the chief would know, I mean, that's an automatic thing that I would have to do at the end of my shift, just to make sure that they're aware that occurred. So,
So you
but
don't know,
what
you
the
don't know if they come
FBI's
automatically to police chiefs all across the country, not just.
I have no idea, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions? Yes.
Well, I guess I would just ask this. I'm actually kind of confused at this point. I mean, I know this can come under another topic, but, on October 9th, a letter was sent to the chief asking for the documentation of the inventory, the pre and the post inventory, arises chemical emissions. That appears in the after action report. The chief didn't give you any indication that he had any luck producing.
I honestly have no idea what you're talking about.
I'm sorry.
I'd love to give it.
It's a request for munitions inventory forms
Okay,
related to the August 5th protests.
August 5th.
Unfortunately, I'm noticing that it says chemical munitions instead of all munitions.
Yeah, I don't have any info on that, but I can.
And I'm trying to figure out if
I think because the only munitions were chemical on the report.
yeah, I was asking about munitions, cause the FN 303s, I've heard reports that those were used on August 5th. And I was hoping to discern whether or not those had actually been, fired at the crowd. Those same ones that we were shown at the tactical de-escalation training. So unfortunately, this is chemical. But I'm trying to understand, should I just do this by I'm trying to understand if this is when you write an information request, what is its weight? Because as a citizen, I can make a Public Records Act request and
Right.
expect that the Public Records Act requirements would be in effect. Does the Police Review Commission not have that same, do these requests not have that same weight?
There's no specific timelines for our requests.
So it's better to just do it as a private citizen?
Better, you mean faster, perhaps?
Can we file a Public Records Act request?
No.
Why is what we do why does that not constitute a request for information?
Because we're a quasi-city entity.
Right.
Because we're a quasi-city entity.
So we're basically.
Because the health department can't file a FOIA on the city manager's office.
In any case, this will come within the purview of what we were talking about before in terms of general responsiveness to requests, right?
Alright, I hope we get onto that soon, cause I think this is quite a bottleneck for us.
Yeah. Not only in this case, but in all cases requests.
That if we can't have information, there's really not much point.
I think we should prioritize it.
Okay. Were there any further questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to the subcommittee reports, we have the homeless encampment subcommittee.
I think Ms. Lee, do you have any,
Sorry, I have no update for you.
so we get no information from the city?
No.
I mean, we can't even get a copy of like the policy? Is that?
Well, that wasn't the question. The question was, I thought your question was, what policies are being relied on, like, for homeless
Yeah,
homeless
that's
encampment.
what I'm talking about.
Right, okay.
So I should just do this as a private citizen, it's probably
That
been
might be
months
best.
now. We I hoped they'd have a meeting in November. We did not have it because, I want to invite several folks from San Francisco who dealt with the policy there to come speak, and unfortunately, the sort of key person, Manoush, Kendrell, was not, available during the time we were targeting, so she's available in December, so I believe Ms. Lee sent out a
I sent out a doodle poll, did you
Poll,
see
right.
my email? Everybody's responded except me.
except me, so I'm due for that, so I'll pick a date off that, and then, so hopefully it'll be just the first 2 weeks of December.
Sounds good, thank you. Alright, moving on to old business, 9B. Continuing our review of the body-worn camera policy. If I'm remembering correctly from last meeting, we were going down the list of Miss Lee's recommendations. I think that's what we were doing, from our October 24th packet.
How far we got?
I think we were at number D.
I think we're at, we made a motion on D. Sorry. We made a motion. Sorry. Okay, hold on. The last motion that you made at your last meeting was to make an addition to 425.17.1.
So we did get past D.
So, I think 1A. Now whether, I'm not clear on whether there was anything else in that section that we wanted to discuss.
It was a list of Kathy's.
So in section 9D, is there anything that any commissioner felt like they still wanted to discuss? This is the, so I'm looking at October 24th agenda packet, page 17.
Page what,
Page
17?
Yes.
October 24th?
Yeah. Page 17.
Yes, so that meeting, we had gone down the list, and we got to number D. And we did make a motion on D.
On D. So I think we're now on,
On
5.
5?
Just to make sure I'm on the right page, mandatory activation, et cetera?
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
And, so, Ms. Lee, we've made some recommendations as we go, and are you keeping a list of that, and they're gonna be forwarded to the chief?
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
You can find them all in the
Okay,
minutes
just,
too.
I got some notes here for help, I'm not sure if we moved on past that, Madam Chair.
Yes.
9B, on top of page 17, it says discussion point, chief, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And my notes here, the chief, I guess, wasn't sure. Need clarification on complaints and civilian witness may do so, chief will get back to us on this. That's all I've got written down for 9B.
Okay, so I did have a discussion with him. he's, okay with the complainants, and I asked him if he could make that language, add that language
Right.
in there so that it's expressly allowed. He was still thinking about the civilian witnesses. He wasn't sure about that.
And that was a recommendation that we made, that they should be allowed to review, or?
That's what we discussed. We
We discussed it, but did we come to that recommendation?
I think that was the sense of the group.
Yeah,
Okay,
as far as, sorry.
just that it sounds like he's considering it, but is he
Right.
taking into consideration that this was what we were asking him to do?
Yes.
Well, it sounds like he's split right now, he's okay, we
I
raised
know.
the issue of.
I'm talking about the witnesses, though.
No, that's what I'm saying, so it sounds like he's split, we got the complainant okay, and he'll get back to us and the witnesses, and if he says no, we take it from there, if he says yes, we're down.
So we are on number 5, I believe?
Yes,
Yeah.
5.
Yes, okay.
But,
Ms. Lee, last meeting you were giving us short summaries of
Right.
each point. Are you prepared to do that?
And I'm not sure
I'm
why
not
this
very-
is called 5. I think it should be E, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, let's get my numbering system clear. Okay, mandatory activation in specified circumstances. Okay, so the summary of this part was, originally, or the last version of the policy that we saw before the one released in September did not provide for mandatory activation. It was should, not shall. The shall has been changed to should, so that's no longer an issue. But the related concern.
shall, which should have been changed to shall?
Yes,
Okay.
but now a related concern is cessation of recordings. And, the commission feels that this should also be, there should be less discretion in when an officer stops recording. So, the relevant section we should be looking at is for 25.11. And by the way, it doesn't matter if you're looking at 424 or 425, they're the same, just the numbers changed. The chief did point out that decisions regarding the reason for muting or BWC deactivation should be documented, so again, that's a should.
Wait, say that again, Ms. Lee?
Decisions, I'm at 424 or 425.11, cessation of recordings, which is page 5 of the policy. Once activated, the member may mute or deactivate, I'm sorry, that's the first sentence. Once activated, the member may mute or deactivate at any time based on their discretion and in the following circumstances. And then it says, it lists the circumstances A through D, and then it says decisions regarding the reason for muting or BWC deactivation should be documented. Now, I'm also remembering as I read this that the chief did say that in that first sentence, he feels that there was a language, that the language needs tweaking, because it should say they can mute or deactivate based on their discretion in the following circumstances, not and. So in other words, only under these circumstances do they have discretion to mute or deactivate. But that's not the way most of us read this.
And what are the circumstances?
The A through D here. Mark, anything else? Number.
Cessation. Yeah, well, I'm just following on this one because it shows what changed.
Okay.
It's the same thing,
Which is not.
same wording, isn't it?
Not all of it.
I'm sorry, which A through D are you talking about?
424.11.
Oh, 411.
Cessation of reporting.
Okay.
So 25.
Yes.
Rich Ward was here, because I think he's got experience with this.
Uh-huh.
It's taken us a long time to get to here. And it seems to me that many other departments, two things I noticed. One, they've taken a lot shorter time for the departments to get cameras than we have. And two, they seem to be, we always look to see if there's a policy in the nearby city, whether it's Oakland or maybe Des Moines, Iowa, or somewhere in Vermont that that deals with some of the stuff. It seems like we're going should to shalls and may, but shouldn't, almost like reinventing the wheel. Isn't there a simpler way, faster way we can get through this, either through following models that other departments have worked on, that are their policy and also haven't been challenged by their unions or the courts or anything else?
On the body worn camera. I will say at the IACP conference that I went to, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, I went to a panel discussion about body worn cameras. There really was not a consistent.
He's not what?
There was not a consistent sort of model approach to it. It was pretty clear to me. Particularly when it came to things like viewing, you don't really know whether you can view something beforehand or afterwards. There were just very divergent views on the approach.
Where is it?
No, the reason I mentioned Georgia is because the BART police seem to have come up with a way that's working effectively, that satisfies everybody, that meets a lot of the criteria that, concerns that we have. But I'm just guessing, maybe others as well, San Francisco. And I wonder why here we are in the 11th hour of the 11th day, still pouring over shalls and mays and woodens and stuff like that. I'd like to get this thing, not just in the interest of time, but get this thing done, because it doesn't sound like, we're turning this into rocket science. It really isn't, and we have models out there that seem to be working.
I agree with that.
Well, I'm not sure that I do, and just a couple things, I shouldn't say I'm not sure that I do, I don't know what there is to agree with or not.
No, I don't either.
So, my perspective on it is that, one, I believe the police department, and I'll correct me if I'm wrong, is operating with a policy in place.
Yeah.
And what we're considering right now, what we're discussing are, proposals to change that policy that is in place. That policy is primarily a Lexipol policy, which is, to the extent that you have a quote standard, that probably gets closest. What Commissioner Randy said, I think, is right, that there is not great consensus amongst police departments, and oversight bodies about what, a model policy should look like, that is reflected in the, divergent perspectives on, 24 issues in policies across the country that, hundreds of departments now have. There was, I believe in Urban Institute, is that right? Did a sort of study of those policies and put it together in a kind of useful way of, each of the kind of major policy choices and where departments land on them. And it's all over the place. I might be getting it wrong about Urban Institute, but.
Right, I don't think it's somebody, but I know what
Yeah.
you're talking about.
And, in terms of, looking at neighboring jurisdictions' policies, that's exactly what we did in the subcommittee. We took San Francisco, we took BART, we looked at Oakland, ACLU's kind of, recommendations on the kind of model policy, and work through all those. That process, or the product of that process, was summarily scrapped when the department adopted the Lexipol policy. And I'm not saying that was the wrong choice, but that was, it was much of the work that went into that was replaced by what we're looking at here. So, yes, it's taken a long time. Oh, one final point. We're sort of niggling about, shoulds and shalls and things like that. I don't think that I'm insulting anybody to say that I think that the chief's primary objective with a lot of these choices is to increase the discretion that the officers in the department have. And that the general sort of tendency on a lot of these questions that we have is the opposite, is to say, here's what you have to do in this circumstance, here's what you have to do in this circumstance. And that, to me, is a sort of, kind of natural push-pull, in this dynamic. And that's why we're going back and forth about these things. And it's only as good as our ability to persuade.
So, did anyone want to take an action, at least on number 5?
I could also add to that I did some research and found that the ABA had a task force on body-worn cameras and best policies and practices. So I made a copy of that, and there's also a memorandum from a judge and professor at University of Chicago Law School, and what they recommend in terms of these various issues that we've been grappling with. So, I don't know to what extent we want to take into consideration their views, but there've been a lot of task forces on this, and so we wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel. The question is, since we had the subcommittee and submitted it and it was replaced by the Lexipol policies, how much weight we will have with all of this work that we're now doing.
Yeah, I think on just one kind of refinement on what Ari said, the policy that the commission submitted was in Lexipol form. I mean, it's like we went through the Lexipol and made our own changes kind of thing. And, so it actually went up to the, council. And I think, what had happened after that is it got into negotiations with the union and through the, negotiation process. And this is the one we have now came out of that. Because the chief might want actually a more rigorous policy, I don't know, but the officers probably want more flexibility. So whatever the reasons were, what we have now came out of that negotiation process. And the question is, do we want to agree with those points or not at this point? We hadn't had a chance to see it until now, after it came through the negotiations process.
I misspoke, and I think that you're absolutely right on those 2 points. I think that's right.
So, do we have confidence that the work that we're doing here will be taken under consideration?
Well, final decision, city council, I mean, this is what we send this stuff to city council? What's
I'm not sure.
process in this? I mean, it's a good question you ask, I mean,
Right,
and
because
you waste a
already
bunch
the
of time if nobody's gonna read it.
did all this work already.
So what is the process? We go through this, we come up with recommendations, then it goes to where? Once we complete our work here.
I would think that you would first take your concerns to the chief and then see what feedback you get. I'm not sure how involved the council wants to get in the nitty-gritty of the policy.
Well, somebody's gonna have to make a final decision.
Well,
Who is it?
it's the city manager's decision,
Oh, city manager,
ultimately.
okay. All right.
So, you'll make a list of all the recommendations that we're coming to
Yeah.
here in these
Right,
discussions?
eventually, I mean, yes, my plan was, put everything together, all your recommendations, every motion that you made, and
To
give
what?
it to the chief.
To the chief, so he looks at it, and then he comes back to us.
And then we look at him and we say, no, we disagree with that, and it goes back, how long is this? We've got stuff going back here till,
Right, but I
you
mean.
know, when they're graving stuff on stones here.
Well,
How long-
I guess you have to remember that this is an advisory body and,
Understand?
yeah.
No, but I'm
So-
saying, I'm still looking at a long, drawn-out process where they already have a policy that they're implementing in the field already.
Right,
Yes.
right.
So but in putting together the recommendations that we then send to the chief, it seems to me that it could be useful not just to say, we think this should say should, or we think that you need supervisor agreement when you want to mute your, instead of just saying that, I think that we should follow it up with, this is what the Bar Association recommends, this is what they do at BART. Each recommendation with some kind of supporting evidence, and I'd be willing to put that together, that part.
Yes, Commissioner Sherman.
One of the, okay, now I'm gonna ask you a question for you. In your research, that you've done, I'm assuming you've done it, if we follow up on your thing, would we say this is the ABA says to do X?
Mhm.
And they came up, well, yes, they did, but the ACLU said, don't do X. And what other organizations are out there? My question to you is just from your research, and you mentioned ACLU.
No, it was just the ABA and his multiple.
Well, I guess, okay, I guess what my concern is like, how much universal agreement is there among some of these organizations?
There is some consistency,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, I think we have to be careful of that too,
Yeah.
because, if we're gonna reference ABA or ACLU or whatever, that we get more than just one.
Yeah.
Respected source that is in agreement with our position on
Mhm.
whatever it is.
On that point, on the ABA, is that the ABA National?
Yeah.
Is it, it is the ABA National?
Mhm.
Because they are, I mean, we looked at this through our process. And people that have what I would call like a national view, don't always get it right for the region.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Because we have different values here than they do in Alabama, or something like that. And so then their national recommendations would be something that would work for across the board, I guess, or
Well,
something.
not so much work, Commissioner, as what they think would recommend that should work for all police
Well,
agencies,
best
whether you're
practices,
an
yeah, to be consistent with,
Be
yeah.
consistent.
Things that, Ari was referencing, I'll call it sort of spreadsheet comparison of different policies across the country is bwcscorecard.org. If anyone wants to look at it, it shows you all these different areas, personal privacy, officer discretion, et cetera, and it compares them. So you can take a look at that if you wanna see whether there's any sort of consensus or best practices that are agreed to. It's
Well,
called bwcscorecard.org.
And those are different policies of different departments?
Yes.
It's not different organizations like ABA, ACLU, or their
Correct.
recommendations?
It's
Okay,
different
those are just the
policies.
practices they're engaged in,
Correct.
not necessarily anybody's view of best practices
Well, it's someone's view of best practices, at least the different police departments.
or convenient practices, yeah.
Could be convenient. So,
And we look specifically at,
There's a lot of different
that's,
opinions.
we look specifically at BART and Oakland and San Francisco and Los Angeles
Okay.
and maybe one or two others.
Okay, I
That's
think
not
it'd be
right.
helpful if we add that information when we send our recommendations.
Yeah, well, it was a kind of a negotiated deal, and I'm not sure that I don't think we have a matrix with all the information on it.
So I would like to make a suggestion that we finish through number 5 and then go to number 3, because it seems like there are some bigger questions in number 3. And then after we finish that, we can discuss our next steps.
We got 10 minutes.
Okay,
I
where
know
are we
that
going?
clock is.
That's an hour
Yeah,
past.
they
Wrong
didn't change the
time.
time yet. Yeah.
That's an aspiration.
What page are you on?
I'm on page 18 still.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Looks like I've been to that long.
I think there are some valid points brought up as to what we're trying to do with this policy. but it seems like going through number 3 would be helpful because it's not as nitty-gritty.
So we're done with the one before that?
Well,
Number
unless
E?
any commissioner wishes to take up the issue in number 5. The numbering is very off.
sorry.
but-
E, E,
Actually, you changed it, maybe CD5, so if you change it to 5.
E, okay.
No, I'm down.
So that's the one where, it's about activation and also cessation, right?
activation is no longer an issue,
Right.
cessation is,
Continues to be.
because it's discretionary.
Right, very discretionary, because I noticed that D on the list of things is, in a member's judgment, a recording would interfere with their ability, I mean, it basically leaves it open to whether it's convenient.
So did you have any recommendations for the policy to change that?
It seems to me that that's wide open discretion, I don't know
Which
how else.
line is?
D
Okay.
of the circumstances that would allow you not to activate, or that it would allow you to cease recording. It's up to the judgment of the member.
Mhm.
It's this,
We're looking at
Page
424.
425.11.
Yeah, but what's the page number on the bottom?
These A through D are not listed on this, other thing, so page 5 of the 425.
Page 5 of the policy,
Of the policy.
near the bottom.
On D, you're talking
So
about
A
D?
through C,
424, here it
yeah,
is.
D is just open discretion,
Right.
seems to me.
The other ones are pretty much in
The other
line.
ones are fine, that's just discussing with your partner,
Right.
you know. But D seems to be like, whenever it seems appropriate.
So,
The A through C there, I was just looking at our original policy that we recommended, is, you know, it's pretty much in line with that. It didn't
And
list
did-
them like that, but it pretty much took care of A through C, but D is new,
Yeah,
yeah.
yes, Commissioner Pritchard.
Well, I would think that, let me see, discussion tactical. Doctor, nurse, or paramedic in private. And the member's recording would interfere with his or her ability to conduct an investigation. I mean,
what does an investigation mean in this?
well, there's
context?
something kind of fundamental, I would think, to policing, which would be having conversations with people and establishing some kind of trust.
So you're saying you agree with me, that they should?
No, I'm saying I can understand, you know, like, I understand that there's a real problem when you have, you know, yes, you know, in the member's judgment, a recording would interfere with his or to conduct an investigation. I'm just trying to tease out what is actually wanted and what is not. For example, you know, is there such a thing as off the record? You know?
I'm.
Go ahead.
Page 30. Usually your thoughts on this one, but take it back, about victims of crime. There was a discussion on the bottom of page 4 of the paragraph, page 30 of the packet. Second to the bottom, paragraph, I'm not sure whether that covers it, regarding victims and witnesses of crimes. Starting with, members shall remain sensitive, et cetera,
You're on the October 24th packet.
Yes, and just one
Recording
page back.
shall resume when privacy concerns are no longer an issue unless the member returns at the section.
To respect privacy by discontinuing the recording whenever it feasibly appears to the member that such privacy concerns may outweigh any legitimate law enforcement interest in recording.
But isn't that the same, like,
Balancing
blanket
test.
discretion, doesn't, how do,
It's a balancing test.
yeah, how do you,
So, is the general consensus here that we want to reiterate our original position of taking out the discretion?
I don't know.
That's kind of hopeless.
I guess it's
You know?
necessary. I guess it's necessary, just have to trust the good faith.
Did, someone want to make a
Well, I mean,
motion?
I think, you know, I think that those times when, you know, if you're weighing like the public interest, you know, when is the public, you know, at this point, it's around the actual, I think, I mean, help me out. I think it's around when someone is being, what do I say, detained, or is somehow in police custody. That would seem to me to be a time when it is essential to have that interaction recorded. But, you know, if an officer is engaged in some other kind of conversation, I wouldn't imagine that would have to be.
Well, that's included in A through C. That's
If you
what's-
feel that covers everything, I don't notice where it
So-
says, I think it's necessary, I mean, it's fine with me.
So,
We can drop D, I'm fine, drop D.
I haven't got one.
so the other side of this is, to deal with those circumstances that have happened, I think numerous times around the country, not in Berkeley, where in incidents where, there is some sort of altercation, there is some sort of use of force, in subduing a subject in whatever. And even though the officers are equipped with cameras, there is no footage, because somebody either didn't turn it on or turned it off at the crucial moment, right? So the evidence doesn't exist. And what a policy that required you to both activate and keep recording would avoid those and create that evidence, right?
Mhm.
And more importantly, serve the sort of deterrence function of officers getting into those situations and circumstances to the extent they have any control over it in the first place. So that's the sort of, that's the problem that
Yeah.
a more restrictive policy is trying to address.
No.
What about, are you suggesting that we maybe delete D?
No,
No?
I'm not.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, delete D here.
I mean, how do we-
I think that this is a pretty expansive, this is a pretty expansive exception to, cessation of recording, to the circumstances
Yeah,
in which,
it
in which
leaves
we
a
can
big
stop
hole.
recording. It's a really big hole. I mean, really, the only stopgap in it is the next sentence, which is decisions regarding the reason, have to be documented.
Mhm.
And that's not much of one for, by my lights.
And it actually, it says
Yes.
should be, it doesn't say shall be documented.
Right.
It's another one.
Right.
But, so, I mean, that's one action we could take and say that we would like to have further consideration of, well, I don't know, it would be, that we recommend that the chief delete D.
Is there anyone who wishes to make that motion?
I mean, what do you think about that?
I'm happy to make the motion, I mean, I think it's an exception that swallows the rule, so.
You think what?
It's an exception that swallows the rule, we talked about it a couple of meetings ago when, Jim Shannon was here. So I'm happy to make the motion to recommend section D, to recommend that subsection be removed.
Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Alright, is there any discussion on the motion?
What the motion is?
To
delete
remove D.
delete D.
To recommend that they have
Um,
a policy.
You can explain why.
Well, I would, suggest, in line with Commissioner Calavita's earlier, suggestion, that, in the communication that is put together ultimately to the department, and city personnel about this motion and about this recommendation, that we do, some of the research to back up, and identify, other policies, from other law enforcement agencies that are consistent with the position that we're taking. As well as, you know, if it's embodied in some of the best practice sources, that would be helpful, I think.
I think we should also cross-reference other sections of the policy that afford the police discretion not to record, but with similar guidance.
Like the victims and
As well as the
witnesses.
victims and witnesses.
Right.
Is that something you would like to add to your motion?
Yeah, I think it should be part of the, yeah, I think it should be part of the presentation.
Ms. Lee, did you get that?
No.
Well, I'm
I'm
sorry.
saying we should cross-reference other sections of the policy that provide discretion for officers to stop recording. I just think that the other sections give more specific guidance on when they can cease recording. For example, the section we discussed about victims and witnesses who have concerns about their privacy.
Did you also
I
want to
suspect
add,
there's some other sections I'd have to look through it, but.
did you also want to add Commissioner Yancowski's recommendation?
Yeah, no,
to the
that's a
motion?
friendly amendment, for sure.
Okay. Ms. Lee, did you get that as well?
Yes.
And one other point on that, though, the next line after D is the one that says decisions regarding reasons for muting or DWC deactivation should be documented. And it should be shall. It's like if you make a decision, you have to document it. It isn't, it's required, not permissive. So if we could
I'm
get.
willing to accept that.
So friendly amendment, okay.
Okay.
In addition, I mean, I don't know, it may be that we should put here, under this cessation of recording, instead of the current D, replace it with, if it is necessary to preserve the privacy or interests of, vulnerable individuals such as victims and witnesses of crimes.
Wasn't that in the previous?
It's in it's about recording them, but not about cessation, right?
It says, shall not activate their camera?
Where,
So could that be added in
Right.
the cross list?
shall not activate, but this is about, also you
Cessation.
should cease if this is introduced. Does that not make sense?
Well, I think Commissioner.
Point 8 is talking about activating, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, I think Commissioner Ramsey pointed out that on page 4, that the second to last paragraph, the language in there might cover it as well.
Yeah, I don't think
All right,
that
never mind.
language is limited.
Take it
I'd be
back.
curious, I mean, I know the police, this is another point where I think it would be useful to have the police officers association here. Do you know of any views from the rank and file about?
I have no idea, cause I wasn't a part of the process with the chief. He would know better, I mean, they met with the chief about what their issues were about policy, so I don't know.
Commissioner Bridger?
I have a question I'm trying to understand what constitutes a criminal investigation and when that begins.
Like what is an
You know,
investigation?
is a consensual encounter that could lead, you know, is that a precursor to a criminal investigation, or, you know, I mean, should we expect that every encounter?
Where are you reading?
Throughout it talks about an investigation and.
You know, it talks about, informal community interactions differ from consensual encounters in which members make an effort to develop reasonable suspicion to detain or probable cause to arrest. I'm reading on page 4, the last paragraph.
How does that affect us, what we have the motion on?
Right, there's a.
Well, I'm trying to get sort of a larger
I'm
sense
kinda
of
confused as to
when.
what we're talking about here, so, are we,
If you'd like to go ahead and make that motion, I guess I'm trying to take a larger view of how one preserves in the mind of the public, shall the public just assume that they are always being recorded whenever they are in communication with the police? Or is there any time when they might safely assume that they're not being recorded?
I think Commissioner Roberts' point was that there's a motion on the floor and he's not understanding how your statement relates to the motion.
So maybe we can take a vote on the motion and
The
then come back to
motion
this.
was,
The motion was to delete
Eliminate
D.
D.
okay.
and
I
change the
understand.
should to shall, and there was one other item.
My
though.
question was, what is an
Includes-
investigation, and since
Yeah.
that language appears in D, I thought it was germane, but if you don't think so, I'm
Well, the motion is to get rid of D.
correct. So whether we retain it or get rid of it, it is helpful to understand what the language means. To me, it is.
So,
Yeah.
I don't know that there's a legal definition to this. My going assumption is that it's what is an investigation to qualify for much of these, to turn the light switch on much of these policy requirements is a very low bar, right? A discussion with somebody that goes towards some sort of enforcement activity is very easily construed as an investigation.
Any
Right,
sort of
that's the
stop
statute.
or arrest, is that?
Well, that would be my understanding with.
No, but that's that's
Yeah.
exactly my question.
That's what I was wondering.
I'm not talking about a stop or an arrest.
Mhm.
So if an officer, and in this policy, they're even going so far as to differentiate between, an informal community interaction and how that might be different from a consensual encounter. And are both, and to what degree are those part, or could they be considered part of a potential investigation, an investigation?
I don't think
Do
that-
you have any idea of how investigation define at least in the training?
I mean, an investigation can happen, it can occur, just, so let's give my example earlier, right? I'm having coffee, somebody comes up, they say, can I get directions to Dwight and Shattuck? I'm not from around here. Sure. 5 blocks down, take a right, whatever. But then they ask for directions for Mars. And I go, oh, this could be a different type of encounter. And they go, I asked the guy across the street, so now, and there's nobody there, right? They're pointing to absolutely nobody there. Okay, now this encounter is different. I'm gonna turn my recorder on because this is gonna be, now, am I going to investigate? Is there something more going on with this guy? And now I'm talking to this guy, and the clerk walks out and says, this guy just knocked over a bunch of tables and pushed a woman. So now, yeah, I have an investigation. So
Okay, so.
things can change
But
and
some
become an
fluidity.
investigation. And strictly, and a lot of it occurs just because, oh, she's in uniform. She's a police officer. I'm going to go talk to her and ask her, right? That's why we do the 30 seconds before and why things change quickly. Does that give you
Yeah, so-
any sense of?
So as used here in this document, this policy, it really means anytime you have an encounter
That could lead
with a
to.
citizen that you think could lead to or has to do with some kind of illegal
Yeah,
activity.
kind of a police action, right?
Okay,
Yeah.
because, all right.
People approach us because something's not right, typically.
Okay,
They,
But-
so that's why police are there, right? So you can go from giving somebody directions to Dwight and Shattuck to, oh, something bigger, a bigger picture is going on here. But because we're in uniform, we're identifiable, people come to us to fix that problem, whatever that problem is.
On page 3 of 425-7, I'm looking at. Second paragraph, the A through F.
Yeah.
You know, it says the body cameras shall be activated in any of the following situations. It does say all in-person enforcement, investigative contacts, including pedestrian stops, field interviews, situations. So to me, it's like you would be able to, I mean, that is an investigation to me. It's like they're following up on whatever is happening at the scene, so. I mean, that's the way it looks. I don't know if that gets your point or not, but that's the way it would read, I think.
But I think your point about whether we should drop D, somebody said we should perhaps do it, but double check with the research to see if that's consistent with what other neighboring cities have done and those best practices.
Yeah, so that is the motion on the floor right now to drop D. Is there?
Was that included in the motion, and somehow we'll have to find that out before we proceed?
I don't wanna, I don't wanna have a contingent basis, I just think we should use it to justify. I mean, I think justification is the exceptions follow the rule.
There's too much discretion.
Ms. Lee, would you mind reading the motion back one time, just so?
Well, I'm not sure now whether the research,
No, just the deletion.
okay, so the deletion is to recommend that, D of 425.11 be removed, and to cross-reference other sections of the policy providing discretion
Here's what
with more specific guidance.
Here, so to me, the motion is to remove D and to change should to shall. That's the motion.
Oh, that's, okay,
That's it.
That's the, what we're recommending.
So
to change.
okay.
Now, and what we're saying is that when we put together a letter to the chief to, explain that recommendation, part of the reasons that we are doing it, the best practices, exceptions swallows the rule. There are other areas within the policy that provide adequate discretion.
That makes sense.
to officers.
Okay.
There was
Is that
also
right?
Commissioner
Sorry.
Polsky's friendly amendment to, it was to cross-reference from the policy and use outside evidence, I believe.
But that's in the
No, but that's in
explanation.
the,
That's an
that's not in the,
explanation.
Yeah, this isn't changing anything substantively, it's just in arguing it.
Okay.
Yeah.
But all of that is included in the motion. Commissioner Pritchett?
I wanted to raise some questions around A, also. But if you wanna vote on D first and keep it separate, but I have some concerns around A.
Okay, I think our motion's already kind of very complex, so if we can just vote on D and then we can take a break, that's all right. Is there any more discussion on the motion on the floor? Okay, if not, all in favor, raise your hands. So it's unanimous.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Pritchett?
So I have a question on A, discussion of tactical or confidential information with other law enforcement personnel. You know, what's kind of weird is that I'm kind of, I'm trying to imagine a scene where there was this significant use of force. And, I don't know, it feels like that information would actually be really important to capture. How the officers kind of manage the scene and what, you know, I think, take a lot of, kind of, can I say, if there was some effort to cover up or manage a crime scene in an unethical way, I think a way to prevent that sort of thing is actually to record it, to document the investigation to some degree at least.
well, I sort of disagree. It seems to me that body worn camera is about police-citizen encounters. You know, that it records that interaction. And if you were to extend it to officer-to-officer interaction, then you'd be having it on all the time.
Well, then maybe there's some other qualifying language, but I would think that you know, if there was a shooting, for example, and somebody was down, is that when you know, you would record the shooting and then you would turn your camera off? That seems like missing that oversight function, that monitoring function that's so important. Seems like it happens a lot.
I mean, are you suggesting that it would be, in that circumstance, that it would be justified because there was a discussion of tactical or confidential information?
Well, I like B. If you look at B, it feels like that sort of addresses the point to where, you know, once the member's direct participation is complete,
Right.
then, but, I mean, I think there's a whole lot. If there's a use of force incident, there continues to be issues around how one secures a scene, for example. How a scene is secured, how evidence is collected. I mean, misconduct is not only in, you know, the application of force, but it's in how procedures are followed or not followed, how evidence is secured or not secured. And so the oversight function and the accountability function of the cameras, I think, would be crucial in those moments. You know, so an action is not just an investigation, it's not just the moment of impact. That is important in terms of police accountability.
What are you suggesting we do with it?
I mean, I actually think that B, where members are on a perimeter or assigned to a static post where the member's direct participation in the incident is complete, and they are not actively part of an investigation, I think that's a fine time to, but if you are part of an investigation, shouldn't you have your camera on? This one says if you're not part of an investigation, you can cease recording.
Yeah,
But the
well,
corollary
nobody's
to
taking
that would
issue
be
with
that-
B, we agree with B, I think.
Right,
Nobody's
so
taking
I'm
issue with
suggesting
B.
to delete A.
What about A?
I'm
You're thinking-
suggesting to delete A.
Delete A.
Is there a second?
Because if the basis for turning off the camera is because you're having a conversation with another officer, doesn't mean that you're not still part of an investigation, that there's not still an investigation happening.
I'm curious as to the reasoning behind A in the first place. I feel like I don't have enough information to just say delete it, because I don't really understand, like, what the procedure is there, why confidential information should not be recorded, like, is.
Well, I mean, let's be realistic though, this information is all, the recording itself is confidential. So who are we not, you know, it's confidential unless it is, required to be divulged, but the exemptions in the Public Records Act, you know, would protect any undue disclosures. So it's already accounted for, so I have this concern that was actually being allowed here is to not document the investigation itself. Of course, officers are gonna be talking to other officers.
So let me try this, in terms of responding. The construct here, and I think this gets to what Commissioner Calvary was saying, the general construct here is not that you put on your uniform, you put on your camera's on your entire shift, right? It is that it is turned on in certain circumstances, right? When you have law enforcement encounters, right?
With the public.
With the public, yeah, right. And that there's a whole fluid range, there's a whole range of what that may mean, and it's fluid, and, you know, we can't exactly define it. What you're suggesting is, sort of, it takes assumes a different, structure to this whole policy and the whole use and practice of having a body worn camera, right? And I can imagine a lot of circumstances where there'd be no reason to have that to have that recorded, and in fact could be problematic because of release, practices of the footage, right? So if you have an unsecured scene, I don't know if it's a robbery or something, there is discussion amongst law enforcement personnel about, okay, here's what we're gonna do next, some sort of planning, some sort of, there's no need for that to be recorded, right? And the point here is that officers are allowed to turn off in that circumstance. I don't see much of a problem with that. I do want to raise a different issue, which is, and this goes back to our D exception swallowing the rule. The introductory sentence to this actually is where all the discretion is. It's not just in D, but it's in the introductory sentence, which is once activated, the member may mute or deactivate the camera at any time based on their discretion. And then the list of A, B, C, D are just examples, right? It's not an exclusive list, it's certain examples. So we need to deal with that.
No, it doesn't say so.
It
I think
says
it
and in the following.
Well, we're deleting and. We're deleting and.
I think.
Discretion in the following circumstances.
Oh, okay.
So it's just those circumstances.
Was that part of the motion to delete and?
No, it was already done.
When was it?
No.
You see,
No.
isn't
Yeah,
that the
the
one?
and, you didn't take the and out?
No,
It's
this
supposed
is,
to be.
it's not, okay.
That's what you said
I
on page
miss-
18, we're eliminating the and.
That's
The
what
I mean, we have to
Officer may
take the
use-
and out, right? It doesn't make any sense if you don't take the and
42411,
out.
number 8, Kathy.
Somebody had two
Yeah.
different thoughts in mind, and they both stayed in there.
On page 18 of the,
Which
Is
that
this the
Ms.
discussion we
Lee
had
put
with the chief?
together, huh?
Is this the discussion we had with the chief, about our divergent understandings of that?
Yes, but I thought this whole discussion was introduced by Ms. Lee saying that on page 18 of the packet that she put together from October 18th. The October 18th packet, page 18, she told us that we're deleting the word and. Isn't that the,
I'm sorry, where are you exactly on
Page
page?
on
Number
page
10.
18, Lexipol policy, oh, okay, maybe it's a different one. 424.7 shall be activated. Once activated, the officer may mute or deactivate their body worn camera at any
Okay.
time based on their discretion in the following circumstances. You told us to delete and.
No, I'm sorry, I was not clear. The chief told me that he thinks that, or I thought he might have told the group.
That's right.
The chief wanted to delete and.
Right, but it's not gone yet, so I
Can
can.
we just, can we include it in our motion?
Yes.
I think Ari's point, I think
Yes.
you both are, I think nobody's gonna disagree on this. so
Yes,
we just not
and I
decide.
thought that and was gone already, so
There
let's.
is no
It's not yet
motion.
gone.
Okay,
Okay,
as
well,
part of
let's
this.
move to get rid of comma and.
You see this
You made
page
that.
18?
Is there a second?
Which
Yes.
This is the October 8th, 24.
Okay,
But,
so-
but,
Yeah,
but
take out it.
it's
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
not October 18th meeting, but it was together with the 24 packet.
Is there a second?
There was a second, yes.
Can we see if there's any more discussion?
Yeah,
on it?
so it's
I
limited
think
to
she's
these
just trying to
exceptions.
see it.
Yes.
Is there any more discussion on the motion?
Can you hang on one second, I'm trying to locate
Here, I'll
what
show you.
we're,
I'll show you, could we?
So you're showing it right
Delete
here.
this word and, and that refers back to here, which means that these are not examples, these are the only circumstances that discretion can be used in.
So in 4211.
Because
I'm sorry,
if the-
42511, because without the, with the comma and,
It
as
doesn't-
Ari was pointing out,
Yeah.
the first clause would be an independent clause, that would say that they could stop at any time based on their discretion,
Yeah.
with no limitation.
No, but it's just in these circumstances,
Yeah,
yeah.
because if the and doesn't come out, I mean, we really have to go
It's
to
open
battle,
discussion.
because
Right.
it opens everything up.
Right.
But you know, there's, the other way that was presented to us was around when they're allowed to, that the camera shall continue unless, so Los Angeles, I think this was George Perez-Velez who presented this to us. You shall continue recording until the investigative or enforcement activity involving a member of the public has ended. It's really simple. LA Sheriff, continuous recording an event should take place until completion of the detention. Recording should not be prematurely terminated. And again, I'm trying to figure out what is it you wanna capture with this stuff? Because I actually think that the way the police investigate is the way they secure the scene, the way it's not only about uses of force.
We all agree.
Am I the only one that's reading this way? No, number A, discussion of tactical or confidential information with other law enforcement personnel. I know it's not limited to this, but when I read that, what jumps out to me is when mutual aid is called up to deal with demonstrations.
Sure, that's another
And-
example.
And
Should they turn off their cameras then? Are they allowed to?
I think if we try to eliminate, I don't know how far that's gonna fly, but I can, not that we shouldn't go ahead if we think it should be eliminated. But,
But let's
if
go-
we're talking about tactical or confidential information with other law enforcement personnel about whether they should block the ramp or let the people go down Fifth Street or what have you, that's just an option to let them turn it off. I don't see this pertaining to, this is broader than just stopping somebody in the street for an infraction or something.
No, what I'm asking here is that discussion of tactical confidential information, that happens within an investigation, right?
No.
Let me try to give you an example. If, for example, there was a car crash and officers were securing the scene, et cetera, but there's an investigation happening, right? Officers are going to have to speak to each other. There's going to have to be some.
But that wouldn't be tactical or confidential. How would you fit the definition of tactical or confidential into officers talking about it?
If tactical says, look, we need to secure that perimeter over there. Oh, look, we need to secure the evidence. I'm kind of shocked that that's.
Is there a motion?
Can I move to close debate on the motion that I made and got seconded? Which was to remove the comma and.
Okay, so we're ready to take a vote on that
Yes,
motion?
let's take the vote and get that done with.
Okay, so on the motion to take away a comma and.
I
all in
second
favor,
it.
please
Yeah.
say your name. Opposed? Abstentions? Alright, so moved. So, I believe
So I'm,
But if we're gonna go back to this, what do you want us to do with this? If you want us to do something with it, please introduce a motion.
She did.
She did?
She
What
did.
is it? Everybody seconded?
Deleting A, no one's seconded yet.
so there was a little, wow. I mean,
Well, it's not over, I just have to think.
I
about
guess
it.
I'm just trying to say that I'm trying to square this policy, like if there's any purpose. So I'll tell you, it was kind of interesting to me one night, a couple years ago, while we're cop watching, and we happened upon a shootout. And a young man named Calvester Stewart was shot. And his body was carried by officers across the street. His bleeding body, his unconscious body was dropped on a sidewalk. It would be super helpful to see what the officers saw through their body cameras. But it was also true that the officers were involved in a tactical situation where maybe there were more people in the house.
Point of order, Madam Chair. We're still discussing a motion which has not gotten a second. So
I'm sorry.
there has been no motion.
Excuse me, I'm motivating a motion, Mr.
No,
Short.
she hasn't made the motion.
I'm sorry, am I
She's
boring
trying-
you?
She's trying to get a
No, but
second.
we're just stalled on this and we got a ton of work to do, you know.
We've
I'm sorry, I actually,
We've eaten up 15 minutes of time. with
Yeah,
that
if
motion.
you've
I'm
got something,
sorry,
no,
I'm sorry.
if there's something that you can introduce a motion, take 15, but where are you going with this and what do you want us to do? That's my question. And I'd love to hear an answer.
I
In the
think
form of a
was
motion.
to delete A.
And okay, is that the motion? I'm just asking, I'm not questioning, Commissioner Pritchett, is that the motion, to delete A?
that would have been the motion. And I don't think that I was speaking in such a way that was so irrational or unintelligible, Commissioner, and I would appreciate it if you would let me finish my point, and I'm sorry.
Only if there's a motion at the end of this, Ms. Pritchett. We can't go on with this all night.
I believe that there is a motion.
There was a motion that was waiting for a second, is what.
And it died.
I'm sorry, I
If
was
it's died, then
interrupted
we
in
move
the
on.
middle of what I was saying, and I actually, unlike some of what's happening here, it's based in real experience. It's based in actually witnessing on the street, actually seeing how this goes down. So if this means anything, which it probably doesn't, because the police will do what they want to anyway. But if this stuff mattered, then gathering evidence and actually collecting evidence, and yes, the way they handle evidence is part of the reason why somebody would have body cameras. How they handle it. And so, yeah, so officers can justify, they say, well, okay, well, we had to have a little confidential conversation. Quick, turn off your body camera. Does that apply in the middle of an investigation? Does that exception of A apply in the middle of an investigation? Or does, what trumps what? I'm sorry that I bored you.
Andrea, could I make a friendly amendment?
There's no
There
motion.
was
on the
no
floor.
motion.
There's a motion on the floor to delete
There was a
A.
motion.
There's no second.
There hasn't been an opportunity because I supposedly had the
There was no
floor.
formal motion. Commissioner Pritchett just made a motion. Is there a second to her motion?
I'll second it.
Thank you. And now you have a friendly
I have
amendment.
a friendly amendment. How about, would it be useful to include in A, except during an ongoing investigation? Discussion or tactical or confidential information with other law enforcement personnel except during an ongoing investigation. In other words, if it's the situation that Commissioner Pritchett is suggesting, where they turn to each other while all of this is going on and have a separate conversation, I'd be willing to add that requirement into this. Would that satisfy you?
Yeah, that's fine.
I think that would be a
No,
That's a
substitute motion.
substitute motion,
Yeah.
because what you're saying is not consistent with deleting A. You're suggesting adding something to A, so.
I guess that's right.
So are you making a substitute motion?
I was suggesting add, yeah, I guess so.
Yes. Okay. Is there a second to the substitute motion?
I'll second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on the substitute motion? Okay. Yes.
Ongoing investigation, so I'm not exactly sure how that,
In other words, if
Fixes
the arrest is
anything.
ongoing and the body camera is still on because the suspect is still there and they're trying to figure out, or the robbery's in, and they're discussing what to do about this, I can see I can see the utility of having the cameras running for that,
mhm.
but not, as they're driving away or after it's complete.
So, but the whole construct here in this section is, these are the circumstances in which one can stop recording after it's been activated, right? So you've activated it because there's an investigation, because there is some sort of law enforcement
Right.
action happening,
Right.
right? So to put in that exception, it just negates the whole concept.
Well, except B is about when the thing is over.
When it's over, right, which is, I think what you're trying to get at with the exception, but that's captured by B.
Commissioner Pritchett, can I ask you, but earlier you had mentioned other policies. Are they just much simpler than this? Other
Mhm.
policies just.
They're written better and there seems to be much more cut to the chase. I mean, it all says that it shouldn't be turned off unless the ACLU shall not be deactivated until the encounter has fully concluded and the law enforcement officer leaves the scene. My question is that A looks like another loophole where if the officers feel like they have to talk to each other about tactical or confidential information, then they get to turn off their camera.
So that's what the ACLU has to say about it? It has to be complete?
That's a snippet that we have from.
It's a snippet, you're right, it's just a different approach.
So it's, instead of just trying to change every little word in this paragraph, would it be helpful to maybe make a recommendation to the chief to consider other policies and we pick a few that we think sound better? And, I mean, I feel like if we keep trying to go through every single line, we're gonna find problems with all of them.
I agree with that last point. And I thought that was why we were trying to focus on the kind of the issues the 5 or 6 issues, 4 or 5 issues that have been identified. And why we're kind of working our way through those.
And this was one of those, right?
Well,
Yes.
cessation of recordings was, yeah.
Actually, yeah, it wasn't one of the 4 or 5 we had, but what ended up happening is that when they went and changed the policy, after we had our discussions with them, they changed this part of the policy, in addition to the 4 or 5 that we had. So they revamped this part right here. You know, my thinking is, I don't know what the motion is, but I understand there could be some conflicts in here. My thinking would be is that I would be fine with it if we took out the word tactical.
I would agree with that.
All right, as long as they have to explain in their documentation what the confidential, why, exactly what,
Right.
yeah, that's a good idea.
Would you like to?
Because I could see some tactical issues that could be raised. I mean, if you're, you know, and
Raised in what kind?
Andrea's
I
point.
mean, I'm really curious about, I'm the only person on this commission who's defended the murder case, so I'm kinda interested in how the tactical, this idea of tactical discussion between MOU, would be relevant in a criminal trial on a murder case. I'm interested in that. Maybe someone can explain that to me.
Honestly, you're
I don't
asking
understand.
what does he mean by tactical?
No, like, if police are talking about sort of confidential tactical techniques, I'm trying to understand what is it that if someone who then gets arrested, you know, later on in the middle of that protest or something, why they need to know the information in order to defend their case, why they need to know what the tactics were in how police, you know, tried to have crowd control or something.
Yes.
I think the only
I don't
reason it
think
would,
the
it would
question-
give context.
I'm sorry, I thought I was.
It would have context. In other words,
I'm
why,
sorry, was I
you know,
recognized?
camera was on here, camera was off, then it was on again. And, in an enforcement action, let's say, and somebody said, well, you know, we had to discuss tactical information. You know, if it's a crowd management or something, that's one thing. If it's a stop on the street, that's another, because the context would be what tactics are using to both manage the site, secure the site, blah, 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 and was that properly done? We would assume that the camera would be on, under what Ari was saying. Once you start that action, the camera should be on. And so we would hear that stuff. They're not, shouldn't be turning it off and on. The reason I went for tactical is because it gives the context within which decisions were made and the outcomes, actually, context for the outcomes. That was my whole thing.
Commissioner Pritchett.
So let me try to understand. What you're saying is that, all right, let me try it like this. My understanding of how these recordings would be used is that they would be released subject to the Public Records Act. So my experience with the California Public Records Act is that there are exemptions. And so, one exemption is that information can be denied, cannot be released if it gives up investigative techniques, for example, or confidential information. Now the question here is, should this information be captured as evidence that could be disclosed not through a casual Public Records Act, but in a courtroom situation? Should that evidence be preserved for the sake of either law enforcement or the defendant in sorting out what actually happened? I am concerned that during a situation, if an officer is allowed to turn the camera off because they're discussing confidential information, that information is lost forever. It's lost for the courtroom. So I feel like the information is already protected because of the exemptions in the Public Records Act. And so I'm not sure why people feel like it's okay, why that should be allowed to basically trump the need to capture the information during an investigation.
So if I, just to clarify, Commissioner Roberts, you had offered to take out tactical.
Yeah, but there was a motion on the floor or something.
So there's a substitute motion
There
and
were-
then a motion. So I was wondering if you wanted to add that as a friendly amendment to Commissioner Calavita's motion. Or offer that as a.
Yes, I didn't, well, it wasn't that, because I wasn't sure I would support her ending to it. You know, she had the, whatever the ending to the sentence was, except in some
Except during an
circumstances.
ongoing investigation.
Commissioner
Yeah,
Calavita, do you have
and
thoughts?
I wasn't suggesting that, I was just suggesting we would take out tactical and leave it as it is.
So are you making, okay, I don't think
And
you can make
well,
a,
that's why I'm
you
trying to
can't, that's a
understand where the
substitute.
motions are, so maybe we ought to vote
So-
on one or something.
I believe.
There's a substitute motion on the floor, and I don't believe you can make a substitute motion to a substitute motion.
But I
Okay.
do believe he can make an amendment to her motion
Yeah, but he
since they're
doesn't,
similar.
but,
You know, I'll withdraw my motion, that'll make it easier.
Thank you.
okay.
Okay, I would make a motion that we recommend that the tactical be taken out of 425.11A.
So we would read discussion of, except the following circumstances, discussion of confidential information with other law enforcement personnel.
Yeah.
Alright, is there a second? I'll second the motion.
Okay.
Is there any discussion on the new motion on the floor?
What, can I just, point of clarification? What information do you reckon is confidential that hasn't been covered in other? Just curious.
You know, I don't have all the answers to all that particular question. When I have to define confidential information, that'll be another couple hours.
Well, it's already been, I mean.
But, I feel confident that the use of confidential information can either be, can be, sorted out in the process if in fact it's confidential or not, and if issues come up when you review the body camera stuff and the testimony or whatever, if there's an issue there, then that would have to be decided at that time. That's the way I look at it.
Okay, I'd like to call this to a vote now. Ms. Lee, would you please call roll for the vote?
Okay. Calavita,
I
Sorry,
abstain.
We're voting on Commissioner Roberts' motion.
Yes.
delete tactical from 425.11A.
I abstain.
Abstain, okay.
Yeah.
Matthews,
Yes.
Pritchett,
No.
Ramsey,
No.
Roberts,
Yeah.
Sherman,
Pass.
Leompolsky,
No.
Sherman?
No.
Okay, motion fails.
Okay,
Okay.
so
You did
moving
that.
on to,
Wait, it passed?
no,
No.
No,
No.
failed.
No,
moving
fail.
on to Commissioner Pritchett's motion. Ms. Lee, would you please call roll on that?
Could you restate the motion,
Yes.
please?
Remove A.
To delete A.
Do we have a chance for one more question? related to the motion?
Yes, for discussion on the motion, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so in the packet that was distributed on Wednesday, October 24th, for that meeting, on page 43 of the packet, there's an attachment C. And the October 24th packet, page 43, attachment C, it's called, on the bottom. And this appears to be a police department, possibly a first draft of a police department, of the Berkeley Police Department policy regarding to the body camera.
This, excuse me, this was the last policy that we saw before, what was released. The last version of the policy that was
Okay.
public.
Right, so this was their policy, before Lexipol was superimposed on it, is that right?
No,
Oh.
it started with, the whole thing started with Lexipol.
Well, I don't understand, so what is the relationship between this policy, because on page 45.
This is the last one that we were loosely negotiating over.
Okay, so
Right.
on the bottom of page 45, cessation of recording. It basically says simply, and this is their own recommendation, I presume.
Well,
It basically says recording shall continue until the encounter's over, period.
says should.
Should remain on continuously until the encounter's over.
The,
Now-
Or
No,
the
this
situation no
one-
longer fits the criteria which are laid out in 450.5.
What does it say
Yeah.
about criteria?
The next clause, after the encounter is over, or the investigation is complete. The incident's complete, right?
No, you're not looking at the same thing
I
I
think
am.
I am. So, you're looking at 450.2 cessation of recording, right?
Yes,
Okay, so it says, should remain on continuously until the member's direct participation in the incident is complete, or the situation no longer fits the criteria for activation. Now, the criteria for activation are in 450.5,
On page 44,
on the prior page, yeah.
bottom of page 2, page 44.
okay. Still, those are all the encounters that we would expect activation for. It doesn't say anything about you can stop it in the middle of one of those things. For these A through D reasons that we've been looking at. It just says it could be continuous.
It says should, not shall.
Right, but still, so was it not through Lexipol that these provisions got added, these A through D? What prompted them to add A through D when they had a very straightforward policy of it should be always on?
yeah, it was through their negotiations with the association.
It was
I think that's what happened,
meet and
because
confer?
you know, we used the Lexipol base, both our base and their base was based on kind of the Lexipol outline.
So this
But
was
we
the result of
amended
meeting.
ours differently than they did. And so, this was their original proposal, and what came out with the A through D came out after negotiations with the, association, police association.
Well, then we're probably wasting our time, because if that's all that they're gonna agree to,
Yeah, but the chief, you know, the chief, if he's so inclined, can go back and talk to them about other amendments going forward.
okay, well,
That's the way I would see it.
I would prefer the straightforward policy they originally had, but, so, I'm in favor of deleting, A, since it just, as all these other things just are opening discretion.
Okay, I'm gonna call it to a vote now. Ms. Lee, would you please call the roll for the vote?
What's the motion?
Yes, the motion is to delete A.
Oh, delete it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Calavita,
Yes?
Matthews,
Abstain.
Pritchett,
Yes.
Ramsey,
No.
Roberts,
No.
Sherman,
Yes.
Youngpilski.
No.
Okay, motion fails.
Okay,
3 yeses, 3 noes, 1 abstention.
So, can we move on to number 3?
Where is that?
We're on
Back
the
on the
new piece
October
of paper
24th
here.
packet, page 18.
Now we're going to, which one?
Roman numeral 3,
Roman numeral.
These are new and significant
There we
issues
are.
arising after April 2017.
page 18.
Missy, could you give us a brief summary?
Oh,
of
I'm
this?
sorry. So, this is something that you identified and discussed somewhat, which is the policy does not account for the iPhone. Part of the issue was that, or part of the reason is that the policy, at least the last version that we saw, before it went into meet and confer, was written before the hardware was purchased. Once the cameras were purchased, there was a decision, I don't know if it came with the iPhone or a decision was made to purchase the iPhone. In any case, the body worn camera has an accompanying iPhone, and that was, I don't know if it's in the October 24th packet, but there was an explanation from the chief about how it operated. The concerns are, however, with how evidence captured by the iPhone is accounted for. And in the bullet points, starting on the bottom of page 18 and top of page 19, those are the questions that we have, or that you've identified.
Okay. So, sorry, are you doing this?
I'm pretty much done. I think it speaks for itself.
Yeah.
These questions. I don't think there's disagreement. I don't believe this group has any disagreement that you would like to know what the answers, what policy is going to govern. Lieutenant Hawk, did you say that in your report that a policy was forthcoming, or a piece of a policy was forthcoming on,
I believe it was on how to upload
oh,
pictures.
photos? It was just photos, is what you said. is
Right,
what I
so
read.
there was, concerns like you guys brought up about the iPhone.
Okay,
How photos are booked and then subsequently removed from the camera.
okay, so that doesn't, still not addressing video, that might be.
Well, you could probably say video as well, it's the same app on an iPhone.
So we have discussed these issues in the past. Out of the 3 questions listed, are there any specific questions that commissioners want to take up at this time?
No, I thought that the chief answered some of these last time.
Yeah, I think he has.
Like, in the first one, is the iPhone taken as well? He said yes. And yes, too. The iPhone's been taken, so they don't see the video on the second.
He
one.
answered that?
He said that it was taken, yes.
We did discuss this last time, and we came to the conclusion that the iPhone, if it's used in any other, we came to the conclusion that the iPhone would fall under the same policy as the body worn camera. So anything that is stated in here, I believe in one point we even added,
Personal iPhone.
personal iPhone into the policy.
And he said the personal iPhone would be taken.
Yes.
I thought that's what he said.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, we all
I don't-
expressed shock, and he said, yes, it would. That's what he,
I'll be interested to see that in writing.
that's what he said.
Well, I think the issue is, I agree, and my recollection is the same about that, but the issue is also not how the policy is currently written.
Oh. How's it written?
Well, it doesn't
There
make
isn't-
any
it doesn't
mention, the
address it.
iPhone is not
It's,
I see.
Not accounted for.
mentioned in the policy.
So we should ask for that to be
Correct.
written.
Yeah.
Um,
We had asked for, training materials and asked to see how officers are being trained right now, and it might gain us some ground to see any written materials that have been provided to officers about the handling, and maybe we could amend or at least look at that.
So that's something that we asked for last meeting, correct?
Well, a long time ago, actually.
Long time
So
ago.
that will be on the list of things we're waiting for.
Right.
Yeah, hold your breath.
So is that something that we can, take up when we give our list of requests to the chief?
You can do it.
We don't have to take action on that right now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, then my question to the commission is, I believe the last section is section 4, but I'm not sure if it takes up any new issues.
I'm sorry, what are we gonna do with 3? Just wait for some feedback?
These are all questions that we have that have not been, that we need answers to, and that the current policy does not deal with, and that the chief, I mean,
So,
I think maybe
the
amenable to.
questions here have been, he's familiar with these questions, right? We just haven't heard the feedback from him?
But whatever we transmit should include the questions, so
Right,
we can
and
get
right.
something in
And
writing.
the concerns have been,
Orally raised, yeah.
expressed orally.
So I guess that
We
kind of
need
goes with my
something
question
writing.
right now. Are we ready to make a recommendation to the chief on this policy?
That's what
Or is there more that we want to look over? Are there any more issues with the policy that commissioners wish to look
What
at?
would you say, unanswered, you mean, any other questions?
Any other questions?
So if nobody has any, then we can go ahead and, I think we could go ahead and vote on this, could we not?
So what does 4 entail?
Okay, 4 entails, it was really a very deep and detailed dive into, comparing what we received on September 28th versus what we last saw, which was April 4th of last year. And there are some paragraphs that I've indicated with a double line on the left that are areas that may raise some issues for you.
Are these the new words that they added
Yes,
verbatim?
no,
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 not with the double lines?
no, it's
No.
not verbatim, it's, because it's part of my analysis.
So is
I mean, I
number,
do quote some parts of that.
is number 4 something that commissioners feel they need more time to look over?
That whole section.
The whole section, there are a few parts that, Ms. Lee has marked for us.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, then I'm gonna suggest that we just focus on 3, and then we can, next meeting, I would ask the commissioners mark specific places that they would like to address, and then after that, we can move on with this policy.
Mhm.
Okay, so, does anyone wanna make a motion for number 3 to reiterate or send these questions to the chief in the recommendations that we give them?
So moved.
Is there a second? I'll second. Any discussion?
I'd like to send the questions, but more importantly, because he already answered these questions, but I think we should say that we'd like to see a written policy addressing them.
Is
Because
that
he
a-
can answer us, he's already answered us in the meeting here, but we'd like a written policy.
Is that a friendly amendment?
Yes.
Accepted.
Please, okay, thank you. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. So unanimous? Thank you. All right, seeing as we're at a good stopping point, I'm going to end the meeting there, sorry. I have to
Can
hold the
I ask
shut.
if we can bring up just like one small issue? Just, it's gonna take 30 seconds, with the,
What small?
email account. Have you ever had a response to that?
What number is that?
It's number 9, excuse me, sorry, give me just 2 seconds. One second, sorry. 9F.
9G.
Yeah.
F.
9F.
Did you have, action you wanted to take on this?
Yeah, but we were gonna get an answer back from, the city as to whether we could have city email addresses.
Ms. Lee, did we get an answer?
Which one is it?
G. You're talking about 9G. You're talking about
Nine.
9G, not F.
9N.
On the, we were looking at
On to
November, the November 14th agenda. Because we've been looking at 2 agendas.
Yeah, I'm looking at November 14th,
10/10/30.
No, it's after.
9F.
Okay.
It's today's agenda, it's page 2 of the packet.
Page 2 of tonight's packet.
Yeah.
And this was
Oh,
something
sorry.
that we had talked about,
Page
sort of
2.
having to search
Yeah.
our own
Yeah.
email account
I got,
for documents related to the commission, and I had asked whether that meant we could get a city email address, so that we wouldn't have that problem.
I got an informal no, and I was asking for a more formal response.
Informal no from whom, and did they give a reason why?
Or from somebody in the city manager's office because of, well, if you did it for this commission, it would have to be offered to all
Yeah,
commissioners.
what would be wrong with that?
And because it's a burdensome, that's why, and because of the number of commissioners going on and off commissions and having to just rejigger every time to open and close email accounts. So, I'm not an IT person, so I don't,
Yeah, that doesn't seem very difficult, but maybe we can still keep it on the agenda for the
Okay.
next one, I can come up with a motion.
What's the utility of it, or what's the
Well,
rationale?
my concern was, they were saying essentially that anything that we do, in terms of emails related to the commission are subject to public record requests. My question was, like, for example, the email address I use is my law office's. So if it came to a time that there was some litigation and someone needed to do a search of my email to establish whether there was anything related to commission business, and probably apply to you as well, I had a problem with that because that would be a search of things that involved a lot of privileged information in other cases. And so I said, well, if that's the case, then it's easily remedied by creating, maybe we have a city email address. So that was my issue. Now, I don't see what would be so complicated about giving everybody a city email address for every commission in the city, to tell you the truth. It seems like it'd be good practice. But I was trying to find out what the answer was, and it seems like we really haven't gotten much of an answer other than from someone somewhere in the city manager's office who said they didn't think it sounds like a good idea.
okay, I left out a piece of information that you may find important, which is the city does not go into your emails. You're asked to produce all relevant emails.
I understand that, but I can say, if there's litigation, okay,
Mhm.
there's gonna be someone who at some point, some lawyer or something may be responsible for making sure that there's a full and reasonable search done of someone's email. And that's my concern. I just don't, I don't foresee that coming up very often,
Mhm.
but I could see it potentially coming up, and I could see it being a major problem for me, who uses a law firm, my law firm, personal law firm email address.
Mhm.
So it does seem like a very simple solution to this, is to give people an email address that for official commission business only, and that's the only thing they'd be authorized to use it for.
By the way, at this point, I could care less if I have a official city email, but if we request it for, I forget the 2 lawyers on the commission.
That guy.
That guy here, and let it go at that. In other words, they understand that there are particular situations that may hold true in other commissions.
Upon specific request.
Upon specific request or something like that, because of, the specific reason it's so stated. Not for all, all of them have to have, we haven't had them in the 15 years I've been here, I can do that this way.
do it.
I don't think
I don't
any
even know what it is.
commissioners have ever had city emails, to my
Well,
knowledge.
yeah, but then we're dealing with this is on our agenda now, this is a new situation, stuff like that we didn't have it in the prior times I was here, and you have at least one, probably two, who would have some concerns with this,
Mhm.
so, in specific cases.
Okay, I could re-ask
I
it
just
that
wanna
way.
see whether there's a response or someone who
Okay.
we feel, you know, is dealing with the issue. I think it would be helpful to get more, and I know you're looking into it, but more than just sort of an informal no with no
Mhm.
explanation. That's not very useful.
So we'll keep this on the agenda for next time. Moving on to public comment.
Sorry to bother you, but, I have, since we're on the body worn camera issue, I think it's important to realize that with the technology available today, I'm not sure if these cameras are able to do this or are gonna be able to download an app to be able to do this. But facial recognition is a big deal. Now, some cameras, body worn cameras by some companies involve facial recognition. Now, what happens with that is that as long as, I don't know, how can I put this? I don't think it's a good idea to have any technology that enables facial recognition. Because today's facial recognition to be used for searching for criminals down the road could be used for searching for dissidents. And if these cameras are on and all of a sudden there's a ding, activist, anarchist, socialist, communist, resistor, the technology could be very harmful. So I think it's very, very important for the Police Review Commission to keep in mind that that technology is available. I'm not sure if it's on these cameras or not, but I think one thing we need to not do in Berkeley is enable facial recognition. It's a big deal to me. I don't know how it is to y'all, but it's a big deal to me. And I'm not forcing around with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Let me just say, Commissioners, thank you very much for the discussion around the deletion of paragraph D or line D, 42511D. The entire discussion was actually quite illuminating, because what you did in microcosm there is something that up to 18,000 law enforcement agencies in the country are all doing, each on their own individual basis, and they're all hashing through all of this, and they're hashing out what are their important issues in that jurisdiction. And what I saw here was that whole debate play out, and I found that illuminating. I actually agree with where you finally came down on, because I agree with the statement that it is an exception that swallow the rule. But it does bring up that, you know, when you're doing these considerations, I invite you not to think that they're wasting time or that it's for no good use, because what you're doing is you're crystallizing what the public interest really is in all of this. And the simplest way to think of the public interest is what the public is interested in. And truthfully, speaking for this particular member of the public, you're trying to offer guidance to the police department of what the proper way to behave is. So I happen to be a more economically oriented person, and I would keep the number of shalls to a very bare minimum, but be very hardcore on that. So for example, if you're gonna make an exception, it shall be documented. That's something you really should cling to, okay? But, you know, we're entrusting officers with weapons and the ability to act in our name to do all sorts of things. We put a tight leash on them for that purpose, but it's the leash that says you're supposed to do the work that we tell you to do and nothing more. Don't go over that bound. I find it less compelling to have the body-worn cameras as a cause for action, you know. That's not the point of these rules, frankly, again, in the opinion of this member of the public. So I would say, you know, continue doing this work because it's important. You are actually on the leading edge, even though Berkeley is behind a lot of other jurisdictions to introduce body-worn cameras. The rules have not been hashed out, and I don't believe there's a lot of case law around it just yet. So
Sorry, 30 seconds, so sorry.
we'll, you know, I guess I just encourage you, you know, it might feel like you're slogging through the mud here, but you know, truthfully, you do need to go slogging through that mud so that Lieutenant Hawk and her associates actually have clear rules. So my main advice is, whatever you do, make sure that it's clear when you're finally finished.
Thank you. Is there any more public comment at this time? All right, if not, thank you everyone for coming. We're